Hi, everyone. Welcome to Waste 360's Nothing Wasted podcast. On every episode, we invite the most interesting people in waste, recycling, and organics to sit down with us and chat candidly about their thoughts, their work, this unique industry, and so much more. So thanks for listening and enjoy this episode.
Thanks for joining us. We're really excited to talk to you all here about ocean-bound plastics and using them in products and some of the challenges and successes along the way. My name is Schoenike. I am the co-founder of Oceancycle. We are a social enterprise focused on certifying ocean-bound plastic supply chains with a very intense focus on the social side of things, which we'll talk a little bit about later. But I'd like to let the panel go ahead and introduce themselves.
I'm Rabe. I'm here on behalf of Dell Technologies, work in their product department. It's a pretty big department, but the part that I focus on a lot is soft goods, so a lot of fibers and textiles is my main area, as well as just sustainability efforts across Dell in general on all product categories.
I'm Rick Wilson. I'm a sales engineer for PolyVisions. I'm a plastics engineer. I've been doing it for about 38 years with a specialty in materials and processing. About 7 years ago, we were doing some PET compounding, and we determined and wanted to make something that was more positive for the environment. We started making a material using recycled PET we call DuraPet. And it's a little different, it's a little different than most uses of recycled materials, where it is being used as a engineering grade material using durable products for someone like Dell, who we work with.
My name is Maxmillian. I work for a company called CPI Card Group. We are a payments technology company, and my role within that is in the credit card division. We manufacture credit cards, and my focus is on sustainable polymers.
Great. Thanks. Well, as I probably should have mentioned, everybody here makes a product with ocean-bound plastic. We all work together, and you use the Oceancycle certification in some capacity in some of the products you're doing. Probably should also mention what is ocean-bound plastics, right? Ocean-bound plastics is plastic collected within 30 miles or 50 kilometers of a coastline in an area that lacks a formal waste management system. And I think that the lacking of the formal waste management is really important and a key piece to it, because what we're not looking to do is certify or incentivize collection around formal or government-run recycling systems. I'd mentioned that the social side is really important, and I think a lot of people don't know that ocean-bound plastics in particular, are all collected by informal communities by hand, right? And so these are the true heroes of the story, and we want to make sure that we don't forget about them. So we did a little social program. Oceancycle does a lot of social work in the communities, and we did a program with Herman Miller a little while ago for food and water in one of these communities. And so I think, diving into some of the topics we talked about prior to, I think a lot of when you hear about ocean-bound plastics and products made out of ocean-bound plastics, I think a lot of people say, well, that would be great, but how do I do that? How do I get started? And so, Max, CPI has a really long journey. You've been doing this for quite a while. And so just be great to hear, from your perspective, what are some of the challenges you faced, and what does that journey look like?
Sure. Well, we started the Oceanbound project, making a credit card out of ocean-bound plastic back in 2018. And it was my boss and I were watching a video on ocean plastic, and he looked at me and said, "Hey, can you make a card out of this stuff?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. My background is in design and manufacturing, operations, and we've been using virgin PVC plastic for 30 years at our factory." So I had zero experience with this. So I just started reaching out to people. Where can I get some of this material? What can I do? Found something that would work. It was high density polyethylene, which is absolutely would never be recommended to be used in a credit card because it doesn't have any of the mechanical properties you need. But we figured it out. And I brought it to our business unit leader. And I think the biggest challenge we had in the beginning was this sort of attitude that we've tried this before, and that was what resonated, in the beginning of this project was, we've done this before, 2008 you tried to do this before, recycled PVC, what's different this time? So we just put it on the back burner. It was a skunkworks project, but then some of the tailwinds that were spoke about earlier came about was through social media, and all of a sudden it percolated up to the business unit leader. He said, "Hey, do you still have that card? Can you still make that?" From there, it was a lot easier, but technically speaking, it was I think one of the biggest hurdles we had to overcome was our suppliers, because every single one of the suppliers that provide to our industry are used to running with virgin materials, and their perception of recycled plastic was, this is garbage. I mean, it's literally garbage. We're going to put this in our extrusion lines, and you're going to shut them down. So the challenge was really just partnering with them and saying, hey, we're not here to just tell you to do this. We're here to help you through this. Let's learn about this together. And that's really the only way that we're able to make it successful.
Yeah, so I think talking about materials and supply chain and some of the issues and working with suppliers, I think, Rick, you have been doing that a lot, Yeah,
it's very important that the supply chain is very well established. And thanks to Oceancycle, who's done some work with different folks to make that happen, we specifically deal with our PET, recycled water bottles and Coke bottles. So we seem to have a never-ending stream of supply at this point, and we're able to take that in and we do a little chemistry on it, and our product makes it. When Max said something about it's always been considered garbage, there's not a lot you've been able to do in the past with PET. You can make, and Chad will talk about this, make some textiles with it. We wanted to do something different where you could take the single-use product and create a very durable material, engineering-grade material out of it. So our DuraPet is made with over 90% rPET, and can replace ABS, polycarbonate ABS alloys. And without having that stream coming in, it would be hard to support some of our customers, like Herman Miller. We could talk about that in a minute, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think it's, you say water bottle in PET, and, touching on the circularity point of this panel, right? Like, you can actually recycle that much easier than you can ABS.
Yeah, if we talk about what we did and I'll talk specifically about Herman Miller. It was a long journey, so you got to have a champion there, and Bob's our champion at Herman Miller, and it came right from the top. We want to do good. As you saw in the video, Herman Miller was all about doing well or doing good. So they took their highest visibility chair, their Aeron chair, their highest seller, and went right for that. And we were able to, over time, we worked with their suppliers and supplied them material, and over time we were able to work out the differences on processing our material versus theirs. Mm-hmm. And once we get to that point, the second part we're working on now is circularity. So Herman Miller can actually bring a chair back in after, again, it's a long-term use product as opposed to a single-use product. We can bring that product back in, pull the plastics off, and the hard plastics on that Aeron chair are all of our material. And replace the ABS and polycarbonate ABS that was on there before. We can pull those parts off, grind them back up. We put that back into our process and make virgin material out of it again.
Right.
So we already have a plan for circularity, and we're working with a couple other companies who I can't mention now on that same program. Right. And we've also talked to Dell about that. So we have plans in place to be able to continue that circularity so that material never ends up somewhere where it shouldn't, like a landfill.
Yeah.
One thing that both of them have stated, which I think is really important to understand and was mentioned in some of the earlier ones, is that the material science for plastics in the last 5 years has really progressed leaps and bounds. So like what was mentioned, we've done this before, why are we doing it again? That really is a misnomer, should be thrown out the window now. If you've done it more than 3 years ago, you should probably try it again, because so many materials have changed. And like what he has mentioned now, typically what you might have said, we can only use polycarbonate for this part, or HIPS or something. Now there's a lot of other materials which are more easily recyclable that have newer additives or other properties that could match what was there before. So really just there's been a huge advancement in material science and applications.
Yeah, and to expand on that, we work with customers that said, we love what this is, but we need now to have it do this. So the same material we made 7 years ago, we're now evolving, into materials that have flame retardancy to them, using non-chemical related flame retardancy. So the whole world is starting to open up a little bit on maybe we can do it. What it takes is a champion, and it takes someone to say, yeah, let's break the wall down and let's go ahead and move forward. And even if we don't get 100% of this product being recycled in the thing, maybe right now, let's start with 30, 40%, and we'll evolve from there. And we've done that with folks, other folks, where they've only had a small component in their whole product line be our DuraPet material. And now they're looking to push it further, that envelope further. How can we move it more forward? Like I said, when we first started doing this with large customers, there wasn't even any molds built for our material. We used existing molds, existing ABS molds. That was great because they didn't have to put that upfront expense to that millions of dollars just to make product out of our material because we fit right in their molds. And now they're building, now they're like looking to build molds for us, for our material specifically, and they've learned. So as we move forward, the windows are just opening wider. But it takes that champion to be able to do that.
Well, Chad, I know you had a little bit different journey because Dell has been involved in ocean-bound plastics for a while. They were one of the leader in creating the Next Wave initiative, right? And so you came in a different space and said, well, you guys are doing packaging and I want to move it to a whole different, area. So I would love to hear about that and how you went from, okay, we've done one product, how do we do something, but it's also totally different?
Yeah, so how to bring a product to market. Like was mentioned, Dell had first started incorporating ocean-bound plastic in packaging, with some HDPEs and other ones that are a little bit easier. It's a big organization, so how do you convince different stakeholders to want to maybe incur some additional cost or go with different processing than there was before? My particular one was I went a bit rogue. I just said, hey, we're going to do it, throw caution to the wind, and let's see what the response is. And I think when statements are made that there is demand out there, that people are paying attention to it, it is kind of like listening to some of these market experts. I can attest that that's really true. We went ahead, put it in the material a little bit ahead of when customers were really asking. Some were, but not a lot. Once we put it in, we really saw big spikes of requests for that type of product. Now we're putting it in not only packaging, but also finished goods, durable finished goods, and using it in areas where for ocean-bound plastic, perhaps you thought, well, this is garbage, the properties aren't that good. The technology and processing has also improved dramatically through that you can get to virgin-like properties or virgin-style properties. So all of those have been resolved as well.
Yeah, well, you mentioned something that's really interesting and I think important is what's the customer response and customer demand, right? So, particularly from your perspective, and I think Max as well, the direct customer, like what are the responses you're getting? How is that pushing you forward, and is it making you evolve what you're doing?
The response is amazing. There's something with ocean-bound plastic that resonates with consumers more than just recycled plastic, because everybody can picture, a turtle or a fish, right, or the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. It's visual, and that creates an emotional connection to the consumer. So we've sold close to 50 million of these cards. It's just crazy demand, and you'd think, wow, it's just because you put recycled polymers in there. But there is this attractiveness that resonates with the customer. And
for you, the customer is the bank that's driving that, or is it their customer that's driving them to do something?
It's their customer. Yeah, we're a B2B, so we sell to banks and payment brands. But they're finding that their customers are asking for this.
Right. So they're responding to their actual customer who's holding the card.
Yeah. Right. We've done some studies where over half of people that were surveyed said, hey, if our bank was to offer an ocean-bound plastic card, we'd switch banks, right? Which is, for the banking industry and the fintech industry, is huge. I mean, they want customer retention. So then it became a race like, hey, we have to have this, because if we don't, then their customers are going to jump ship. And it's really hard to get them back once they leave.
And then Chad, for you, I mean, I think like this Dell bag is great. I love it, but I wouldn't often seek a Dell bag, right? I don't see them on the shelves as much as I would see other brands. So for you, it's a business customer often, right? And how are they driving what you're doing? Yeah, huge. In the process, a lot of times is that we're approached by a customer, asked for a certain type of product. So it might be, it could be a laptop or a desktop or things like backpacks and briefcases, and they're starting to say, we want X percentage recycled content in this product to even entertain purchasing it from you. So we're really seeing customer demand spike in areas where the customer isn't maybe that in tune with where areas are headed. They don't have that as part of the requirement, but then when the sales team shows them, hey, this compared to an option that doesn't have any, it definitely is a winning conversation. There always seems attraction there. And part of what we also wanted to touch on today is not just the fact that we're using recycled content, but there's also huge social benefits that can be touted as well. Yes, it's got recycled content that helps to prevent plastic from ending up in the ocean, but it's also having real dramatic impacts on your supply chain that can also resonate with your customers. Yeah, well, the supply chain is interesting. Max, and when we were preparing for this, I remember you saying that it's not a supply chain, it's our supply web, right? Yeah. And you started looking at it differently, and I thought that was a really interesting comment, because when it comes to ocean-bound material, it's, you're sourcing from a lot of different places potentially, right? Or sourcing from places you might not be as comfortable with. So it'd be interesting to just hear, from all of you, how you've adjusted to that supply web and how you've changed, you've looking at a different source and brought that in.
Yeah, the supply web, it's definitely a change in thinking from our linear supply chain we're used to. Quite frankly, 5 years ago, we didn't care where our plastic came from. Right. Now we do. Now our consumers care where the plastic comes from. So you've got people like yourself, certification, right? You have collectors, you have recyclers, you have extruders, you have subcomponent manufacturers, and it's really critical that you sort of know who they all are. There's this transparency that didn't have to exist prior, and I think that and you still have to respect the boundaries relative to, if I go to Rick for a polymer, he needs to be able to sell it to me at a good price. But if I'm going back in his supply chain several times to figure out who's collecting it, where it came from, I might know his price. So I think there's this trust that has to develop between all the suppliers to say, we're gonna hold all these balls in the air at once, and we have to know where it comes from, and it's traceable, but at the same time we respect the business purpose for what we're doing.
Yeah, and I like to consider that transparency, right? We gotta have. So when you're working with someone like Max or with Herman Miller, who I work with, there's got to be a transparency. We've got to be, it used to be, we're not going to tell you what our material costs are. We're not going to tell you where we get our stuff from. We're not going to, but now we consciously make sure that our customers are involved right in the beginning to know that, we use Oceancycle as a certification arm, and they do a tremendous job. And Herman Miller knows that we're getting supply from materials that are qualified under the Oceancycle, and then here's what we have to pay for it, right? Because there's less. It used to be a major cost factor, right? Was in the past, but it's becoming less of a factor. And I think we need to be transparent about that and say, hey, we're a team. We really want to do this as a good, right? This is not just. Of course, we're going to make money. Everybody has to make money. I hate to say that. But we wouldn't be sitting here if we weren't making money. But we also have to work as a team and be very transparent about, we're not out just to make money, but we want to work as a team. So I think we as a company have done a good job with that, and I think it's important and vital to guys like Chad's group at Dell and to Herman Miller. It was very essential. So.
Yeah, I mean, the social component is so important, and knowing where the plastic comes from. I think that, you know, Max, you said it, like you used to not care where your plastic came from. And I think one of the things we found with Oceancycle was once we started telling companies or, you know, suppliers that about how this plastic is collected, we started seeing a lot more questions, you know. And, you know, we had a lot of questions from CPI for sure.
And I think it's important that a lot of times that the tracing of the recycled plastic really goes back to just maybe the pellets, you know, like, and so one unique thing about Oceancycle is that they really are monitoring and certifying the collection all the way back down to where it's being picked by that informal network.
Yeah.
And that's really, honestly, I think that's where a lot of the value in the storytelling and to the customers comes from is from that very last little bit that a lot of places actually don't give you a lot of visibility to. So understanding your product all the way back to where it really is originating is critical to find some of that value add.
And I think it's important because of and I'm going to use this term because everybody knows it, the greenwashing, right? The greenwashing effect. We can't start greenwashing things because we won't get the support, right? The end users, your end user won't trust you anymore. We said transparency. That transparency is very important for trust all the way to the end product being sold. So we've got to have that visibility of where things are from, how are we getting from point A to point B to point C. So.
Yeah, I mean, the trust, I imagine it goes both ways, right? Because if you know, Rick, in your case, you're going to divulge a lot to a buyer, right? And you're going to say, okay, well, we're going to trust that you're maybe not going to try and work around us to go do something. In the case of you guys, maybe a little bit different because you have a unique offering.
Right, exactly. And again, that's that trust and teamwork, right? So it's really how do we get from, you know, things getting thrown into the ocean ultimately or being in there to where we're going to prevent that long term. And to do that, you've got to have trust all along the way.
Right now, I think, you know, with the companies that we have on the panel and others, there's a lot of sharing of information. I mean, a lot of my suppliers are actually in the audience as well. We're saying, please spread the word. The only worry we really have right now is there enough of this material? Like we want to share our suppliers. We want everyone to know what we're working on. What we hope that the audience of this expo can help facilitate is help us have enough material for everyone to be able to use it. We really are seeing that it's going to get to a point where our demand, the manufacturing demand, might outstrip what's able to be provided to us. So we do want that support from the recyclers and from the collectors to be able to give us enough material.
Yeah, and in some cases, I hope at some point, being the old guy on the panel, that I don't have to talk about this 10 years from now, right? Because we've already got all this stuff in place and it's happening, and that's my goal, is to kind of get out of this thing and have it all be happening automatically, regularly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be great if at some point we were not talking about it's ocean-bound plastic, but really just responsibly sourced plastic, right?
Exactly.
And I think that's what we've focused on a lot in the supply chain, is the responsible sourcing, because once you start, you know, looking at, I mean, there's not a lot of difference in how it's collected if you're, you know, 300 miles inland in a place that doesn't have a formal waste management system. You're still going to experience all the same risks when it comes to collection.
Exactly.
So. So, you know, I mean, the cross-country company collaboration, I think, is really important, right? And you know, Chad, I know you weren't maybe at the beginning of Next Wave, but it would be great to hear more about Next Wave and how that's facilitated the collaboration across the companies. I know, like, and Rick, maybe you can speak to this a little bit more, is that Herman Miller, you know, they said, you know, you don't have to just work with us. You can work with anybody else making chairs, right? And so, you know, I think that's an important aspect of growing this type of thing. So, you know, from the Next Wave perspective, you know, how has that been helpful? Yeah,
so Dell was one of the co-founders, if you will, of Next Wave Consortium, which is really focused on just promoting the use of ocean-bound plastic, and that also includes nylon that's recovered fishing nets, which That's such a big portion of the material that's out there in the ocean that's included as well under that moniker of ocean-bound plastic. But this is really, it really was just a way to be able to help manufacturers, industry get together and share resources and find creative solutions on how to help both upstream and downstream of the design and manufacturing phases, and being able to say, okay, we want to work with this recycler. Maybe if as a company we work with another company, we can get them enough feedstock to be able to supply us. There's so many of these areas where it's just finding the right partner. If one recycler tells you no, please go ask 50 other ones, because it really does seem like at this point in time, there's a really big increase in innovation out there through all the different aspects of the supply chain, and it's just finding that right partner. So Next Wave Consortium is really kind of built around that. Let's help people find partners, find good collaborators to work with. I know maybe you guys have had similar successes like that.
I got to say, working with Herman Miller was a joy. We went on a journey together, right? And once we got 90% through that journey where they were putting out product, they told their biggest competitor, Human Scale, you got to get a hold of these guys. It's kind of fun on that, and Dell's the same way. Oftentimes a customer wants to come to you and say, you got to sign all these NDAs. So when Dell approached us on the recent project we're working on, I asked, do you want an NDA? He goes, no, I want you to tell everybody you're working with us and what you're doing. And I said, why? He goes, because we're doing good. And we want everybody to know how what we're doing can affect them and how they can climb on board. And that's a bit of a breath of fresh air in our industry, especially where we work with most of what we do, even outside of what we're doing with the DuraPet, is all NDA based. You can't tell anybody. And Herman Miller and Dell were both just, please tell everybody. Here, show our parts at shows. Do everything you can. And I think that's that transparency and responsibility, right? Where they said, listen, we've got to be responsible for the future, how this stuff is being done. And it's just a breath of fresh air.
I'll just add to that, the scale that you can achieve. I'm just thinking back to 5 years ago, right? We didn't care where our plastic came from. And now that we do, I can remember hopping on a Next Wave call with, 3 or 4 other manufacturers and saying, we all have a problem with this particular subset of material that we're all sourcing. How can we figure this out? And not only how can we figure this out, but how can we help the supplier figure this out so that we can all consume more of this material? Mm-hmm. It was just it was almost magical in a sense, like, hey, I've never done this before. I've never been able to go back far enough on the supply chain to fix a problem that could be then deployed to all of our suppliers. Because the way it worked before was, somebody creates a unique polymer and that's where you get it from.
Right.
Now it's going backward, back a little bit in the supply chain. Now you're able to leverage that, and that supplier can then sell more of it. So you're able to achieve that scale through this open collaboration, which is just fantastic.
And do you think that, I'll ask you a question, do you think that collaboration is something that helps drive what we're trying to accomplish faster, more forward faster?
Yeah, way faster.
Yeah, right?
I mean, I can't see, if you have a technical issue when you're manufacturing a product, if you can't resolve it in a timely fashion, you cut bait and you move on.
Yep.
And that's not what's happening here. This is saying, okay, let's collaborate and let's figure it out quickly, and then we can use it. And it's just the fastest path forward that you can do.
That team, it's not just a teamwork between the supplier, who I'm one, and Dell, and it's CPI, Dell, the supplier, Herman Miller, all working together, which is really, really unique and probably something you don't see out there in the world too often.
It's that supply web.
That supply web, right? Or even that web of just cooperation, right? That really I think it tells you how important what everybody on this stage is trying to accomplish is, because they put aside that competitive balance, and they've said it's more important to do good at this point than to have shut out competitors and stuff. So it was very unique.
I'll give a good example of this. probably, I don't know, a month or two ago, you guys probably saw the email. I think it was Bob from Herman Miller said, hey, I've got 40,000 pounds of material that I can't use, right? And all of a sudden, there's this mass email blast. What can we do? And we're trying to figure it out over real time. How can somebody else use it? Because maybe it's suitable. Right. Whereas before, I know it would have happened, right? We would have just thrown it in the garbage can.
May have ended up in a landfill.
It would have been in the landfill. Yeah, right. Recycled ocean-bound plastic back into a landfill.
Right.
But that's not what's happening.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think we got maybe about 10 minutes left, so why don't we start with questions?
Hello, thank you very much for your conversation. Extremely interesting to see the cooperation between suppliers. I think that's crucial. I had a question for Brad in particular regarding Dell, the good work on trying to work with ocean-bound plastic. But I was struck by one comment from you saying that you don't get enough to meet your goals or your ambition to work with us. But what about the 95% of the plastic that is not recycled in the US? Why wouldn't you use that huge amount that ends up incinerated on landfills or exported somewhere else? What I'm getting at is, would the fixation on using ocean plastic be actually detrimental to the bigger picture of recycling the huge amount of plastic that we're not recycling? Thank you.
Well, I have some thoughts, but go ahead.
I can comment on that.
Yeah.
We do both, right? So we think it's very instrumental. I think it's a great question. I think there's value in both, right? So we're actually pulling in U.S. streams of recycled PET in our particular product line, and also ocean-bound. So it's really, and we don't cross the streams. So it's very separate, right? So we have an ocean-bound product and what we call a standard product, which is maybe not the right term for it, but it's really where the customers or my customers deem where their value is, right? Is there more value in the ocean-bound for them at this point, or the recycled stream within the U.S.? And we do both. So I have a couple customers who have a product line, and this product line uses this, and this product line uses this one. Great question, and I don't think it's detrimental to the U.S. Recycling, but I do think it just adds to it. I really do. I believe it's very fundamental. I think it's more visible, right, when you say ocean-bound. And I work with some companies who don't want to use the ocean-bound. They only want to use the U.S. So did that answer your question?
Well, I think it was kind of directed at Dell, right? So, or you are Dell now, right? So.
I thought he said Brian. I'm sorry.
It's a good question. It's one of those, for Dell, our product offering is so incredibly broad. It really goes back to what I was saying, understanding very intimately the product that you're making. Because beyond just what your feedstock is, it's also what's the proximity to your manufacturing site? All of these other incidentals around it do you want to consider to make that best trade-off or best choice? So I can just say we have a huge suite of solutions, and it just depends on what product we're making and where, and understanding that full life cycle. Really we've learned a lot at Dell over the last, we've learned exponentially more over the last couple years than I would say the preceding, just because of what I had mentioned in that big innovation boom and the amount of emphasis that's now being put on having full LCAs of products and understanding your product carbon footprint. And when you get as far back into the supply chain as like Oceancycle goes, you make a lot of discoveries. And so it's very hard to say, oh, material A is better than B, because there's so many different factors that have into there. But yeah, we want to look at every single possible one. And that's why we're also saying, we really want others to come to us, show us your offerings, because what might have not been considered feasible in the past probably is today. I really do believe that there's been such big advancements that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, as they say, a lot of really easy solutions for a lot of these waste streams. So the biggest one that we're seeing now is because there is constraint on some of these waste streams, companies will come in and sign exclusivity agreements, and then all of a sudden you're shut off, so you have to find a new one. Yeah. So that's why I'm saying we really want more coming to the table, because we're starting to see, maybe as a little bit of a prophetic statement here, that those types of constraints probably are going to become more often. So we're wanting to bolster, encourage more recycling supply into the manufacturing.
Does that fine gentleman get a bag then?
Yeah, for sure.
I think he does.
Well, if he needs one. Oh, okay.
Oh, good. We can't see up here, so we have to rely on Rob.
Yeah, I would just say really quickly from our perspective, Oceancycle, we wanted to establish a system for verifying and creating transparency in the ocean-bound plastic space, because we knew brands wanted to use the material. I agree we have a huge problem here in the US, but we also know that in a lot of the countries where we work, the material is likely going to end up in the water if we don't create some sort of demand or incentivize for it. In the US, there's more of a chance it'll end up in a landfill, right? But we know it's going to end in the environment in these other places. So that's just from our perspective why we sort of did a lot of what we've done with Oceancycle.
I think Chad and I talked earlier today about leakage, right? Where a lot of the plastics that are ending up in the ocean are from countries that have large amount of leakage. When we say leakage, there's no way to collect it. Where in the US, we may have the lowest recycling rates, but our leakage rates are very low. We don't, it doesn't end up in places it shouldn't be as much as it is in some of the other areas of the world where there's a there's a recycling rate, low recycling rate there, but there's also a high leakage rate. So we talked about that.
All right.
Yeah, thank you. This is Erica Daly from Merrick Pacific. I think you guys actually just teed up my question really well. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the how folks are giving you feedback or asking questions towards ocean bound versus ocean sourced. And I know you had spoke a little bit about greenwashing and how you're really trying to avoid that. I'd love to hear more about that nuance, because it's becoming more and more, at least we're seeing more questions about, we have a product that has ocean bound plastics as well, and we get questions around that, right? And I think it's coming up a lot more. So if you could speak a little bit to that, and then also to the LCA that you had just mentioned, around a lot of this ocean bound material has to move from one side of the world to the other to get used to manufacturing, and what you've seen in terms of benefits in the life cycle analysis, if you've done any so far. I'd love to hear about that as well. Thanks.
I guess I just want to clarify, when you say ocean sourced, you're saying material that's coming from the
pulled out of the water versus on its way, on land on its way to the water.
Right. In terms of like what Oceancycle certifies, we have only certified what we would call ocean-bound plastics. And the reason we've done that is because we've looked at and we've tried projects with plastics coming from the water. And, a couple issues are, it's really hard to determine, like, okay, you go to a beach, has that plastic been sitting on that beach, from the land? Did it wash up? But also, if you do like a beach clean, it's going to take you a long time to get just a tiny amount of material that you can reuse, because most of the material in the water breaks down from salt and UV and pretty quickly, and so it can't really be recycled in volume in traditional mechanical recycling processes. So everything we do is really, we only really certify ocean bound for some of those reasons. I know that there is, some ocean sourced material, particularly through like the ocean cleanup, but we just don't see, and we see a lot of, in terms of greenwashing, we do see a lot of, a lot of people terming things ocean plastic when we know it's ocean bound. So, but.
Yeah, I know that you've been working on trying to standardize a definition of ocean bound. So one of it is just making sure that we have an industry-wide consistent application of that term. So there's a lot of other agencies out there I know that you've been working with. That's one area that I think is still evolving, that we really need to level set what is meant by ocean plastic versus ocean-bound plastic versus ocean-sourced. There's work that needs to be done there.
Yeah, when we looked at ocean recovered or ocean sourced, and we tried to do our chemistry on it to bring it up to, quote, virgin standards or above, sometimes even above virgin standards, we struggled with it because the chains were so broken down, and I'm going to get a little technical, but there was not a lot we could do with it. So we took the conscious effort to say we want to work with it before it goes to the ocean. And if we continue to work with these plastics before they get to the ocean, then there won't be anything in the ocean. You know, we can't go backwards. Let's go forward. And I can comment on the LCA because we have an LCA on our material. And to comment on the LCA, we did what we call a screening LCA, because someone like Dell would have to do the final or even Max, the final LCA on their product line. But from a material standpoint, for instance, Dell uses polycarbonate for a lot of their product lines. So polycarbonate versus our DuraPet, we have about a 50% reduction in carbon. Carbon usage, and that's even using it, and we're trying, and so we've moved some of the way we're doing things. That even means getting the material from Taiwan, bringing it to us, and then sending it back to China. That was all included, and we still had a more than 50% decrease in the CO2 emissions based on a virgin material. And on top of that, they can then do their LCA on the final product based on our screening LCA.
Yeah, you have to also consider that a lot of times the material in places where it's sourced out of, where we work, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, places like that, it will get burned. So there is that stopping it from getting burned too component.
Yeah, and one helpful part might be a full-scale LCA has a lot of different vectors that you're measuring, right? So sometimes you need to prioritize which one is the most important one that you're wanting to do. If it's just greenhouse gas emissions or global warming potential, sometimes a lot of people get scared because they hear, oh, an LCA is going to cost me $60,000 or something like that. If you actually clarify with a lot of those suppliers, I just need a product carbon footprint, you can get a much more economical pricing on that. But in general, again, I don't want to make a lot of generalizations. Usually transportation, the world is really good at transportation. I would say don't be too scared about moving material around. Generally, when you look at the total product carbon footprint, transportation is a very small portion of that.
Yeah, and to
we'll
comment,
let you, or Max, if you have a comment, I think we're getting a blinking red light on this.
I'd like to just comment on what Chad just said, if that's okay.
Yeah.
If not, I'm going to do it anyways.
Yeah.
We looked at putting a factory in Asia to make our material. And when you look at the overall picture, the electricity that would be generated in that factory cost umpteen-fold more than in the United States. So the LCA was actually almost as high as producing virgin material in that same country because of the grid mix. The grid mix, yeah. So the transportation cost was very low. Not just the cost, but the carbon footprint of that transportation was much lower. We did not anticipate that. So just to piggyback on what you said.
Yeah. Great. Max, did you?
Yeah, I'll just say, I look at the LCA because we've done one on our products as well. I look at it as a sort of a gap analysis. Yeah. It's like, hey, you know what? Here's where we're performing well in these vectors, and here's where we're performing poorly, and we need opportunities for improvement. So then you can start to triangulate and say, okay, well, if we're moving material here, is there a supplier that can process it locally there to reduce the carbon footprint? So I would say it's a starting point as opposed to an end game.
Great. Well, we will end it there. Thank you, everybody.